The time is now 5:35. Good evening and welcome everyone to the February 19th, 2025 Operations, Budget, and Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting. I'm Zakia Goins-McCants, Committee Chair and District 8 Board Member. Thank you all for joining today. For those unable to observe now, the meeting is being recorded and can be accessed on the PGCPS YouTube channel for later viewing. Ms. Adler, please call the roll.
Mrs. Goins-McCants,
Present.
Mrs. Brown,
Present.
Mr. Briggs,
Present.
Dr. Moss, Mr. Jackson. We have 3 present.
Thank you. With a quorum present, the Operations, Budget, and Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting will come to order. If there are no objections, the committee shall adopt the February 19th, 2025 meeting agenda. There being no objections, the February 19th, 2025 meeting agenda is adopted. If there are no corrections, the committee shall approve the January 29th, 2025 meeting minutes as distributed. There being no corrections, the January 29th, 2025 meeting minutes are approved. We have no registered speakers for public comment today. And due to the amount of things on our agenda, our Chief Operating Officer has so graciously allowed us to focus our time today on the budget. So the chair recognizes Chief Howell, Chief Financial Officer, for the budget work session overview and follow-ups.
Thank you, Barbara Chair Goins-McCants, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen so we can go ahead and get started going through the presentation. Let's see, let me put this into presentation mode. Oops, just bear with me for 1 moment. All right, there we go. All right, so good evening, everyone, again. Good evening to our board members, our colleagues, and our community stakeholders. As outlined under agenda items 4.1 through 4.3, I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of where we are in the budget process, provide an update on the projected revenues, as well as the related budget gap, and then give you a high-level overview of the 26 proposed budget changes by functional area. This will help to level set where we are before we dive into the proposed amendments, where administration will have the opportunity to respond and answer clarifying questions before the ABAFA committee members vote on which amendments will progress to the full board. So we'll go ahead and get started. So wanted to kind of give a brief update on where we are in the process. So just as a reminder for our community members, in the first phase, we completed 2 budget work sessions where administration had the opportunity to answer questions from board members around division operations and the superintendent's 26 proposed budget. The work sessions were followed by public hearings where the community had the opportunity to engage in the process and share feedback regarding the proposed budget. During the second phase, board members had the opportunity to submit amendments to the superintendent's proposed budget. Those amendments were reviewed by administration, and responses will be discussed this evening prior to the ABAFA committee members voting on which ones progress to the full board. That will take place during the third work session, which is scheduled for tomorrow, February 20th, 2025. Please note that for this third work session, the public hearing will actually take place before the work session. So the public hearing will take place at 5, and then it will be followed by the work session starting at 6. Once board members vote on the amendments during the last work session tomorrow, the requested budget cycle will be finalized and presented to the board at the meeting on February 27th. After the requested budget has been approved, it then will be transmitted to the county executive by March 1st. So now let's get into an update on revenue projections and the budget gap. So as shared by the budget director, Siobhan Smith, at our last OBAFA meeting, the unrestricted revenues outlined in the stated calculations that we received mid-January are increasing our revenues by nearly $19 million. So in looking at the chart that you see there, kind of focus on the far right column circled in red, and it sort of outlines the changes by each blueprint program. So you'll see the largest increase is in the English learner or multilingual learner category, as well as special education. And that's primarily due to an increase in student counts, slight increase in student counts relative to what we assumed in the proposed budget. And then we also have a change in our foundation funding, not because of the student counts or the per pupil amounts, but it's tied to requested change that we're going to be making in the submission to the county to restore funding for two of our grant funded programs that was cut in 2025. And we were forced to take the funding for those programs out of foundation. So we're looking to have that funding restored for 2026. So overall, net at a high level, it's increasing our revenue relative to our proposed budget of nearly $19 million. Now, the increase in revenue of $19 million is reducing our current budget deficit to $23.3 million. So you may recall during the proposed cycle, we outlined an initial deficit of around $42 million. We were able to identify reductions at that point, which include central office reductions as well as reserve reductions, which brought it down to around $37 million. So now with the change in revenue, that gap is now further reduced down to $23 million. Throughout the requested cycle, we have been actively working on identifying adjustments to be able to achieve the remaining $18.3 million needed in order to close the budget gap. Those adjustments, we will be processing those throughout the reconciliation cycle, which really takes place from March until late May. Once we kind of get through the whole process with the General Assembly, we sort of know some of those changes, but what we've identified up until this point to be able to get to a path to close the budget gap is looking at our updated systemic projections. We've identified some revised contract commitments. We're revising some of our budget assumptions. We're also making a reduction in some of our discretionary spend. And then we're looking to optimize some of our organizational structures in order to obtain better efficiencies. So we feel like we have a pretty good path forward based off of current legislation as it stands now. Of course, as I said before, we're going to continue to go through the remaining budget process, and there's some uncertainty tied with that, right? We have to get through the General Assembly process, which doesn't wrap up until May. We are in negotiations with our labor partners, PGCA, ASASP, and Local 2250. And once those have settled, we'll have to reflect those changes or update our budget assumptions. And then, of course, we have some uncertainty at the federal level as well, unprecedented changes at the federal level. But for now, based off of what we know, we are in a good place to be able to have a balanced budget. I did want to provide a glimpse of what we are potentially facing with two bills currently floating their way through the Maryland General Assembly right now, Bill 429 and House Bill 504. As some of you, I'm sure, have heard around the pause in implementing a certain element of the blueprint relating to collaborative planning, pushing that off until 2030. With that pause comes a delay in funding that was supposed to begin in fiscal year 2026. This delay will have an impact on our per pupil amounts that we receive for three of our key programs: Foundation, which is what we receive for every single student. And then on top of that, we also receive funding for multilingual learners, as well as those students who are economically disadvantaged, also known as our compensatory education funding. So those three programs will be impacted should this bill go through. That will result in a $20 million reduction in the revenue that was reflected in the proposed budget, increasing our deficit to nearly $63 million. This budget gap is obviously substantial. And with the program funding for those three areas, foundation, multilingual, and compensatory education, the majority of the funding that we receive from those programs funnels to the schools. So if there's going to be a change in pausing collaborative planning, we're going to do everything that we can, certainly mitigate and minimize the impact of schools. But it's not going to be possible to fully avoid it because most of the funding we get goes towards our schools. So we will continue to work through this process to determine what levers we need to pull in order to reflect this change if it does go through current legislation. So this next slide here provides an update or a look at, or more really a detailed look into the county contribution that will be reflected in our requested budget cycle. So again, kind of looking at the chart from left to right, you've got an outline of what is required for the county to fund. So you've got your 25 number, you've got your 26 requested number, then you've got the change in that last column. So the first blue section outlines the requirement of the county to fund Blueprint. With all the Blueprint funding programs, there's a state share and there's a local share. So this is the local share that the government, local county government is required to fund, and it's all driven by a formula. In addition to that, in addition to the local share, which is $969 million, we are also requesting the county to fully fund the Office of Integrity and Compliance. That's already reflected in the superintendent's proposed budget for 2026. So we've got the expenses in the budget, but we also have the revenue in the budget. So that's going to continue in the requested budget submission as well. Now, there is currently legislation, again, going through General Assembly, House Bill 370, that includes verbiage for this office where the related budget would shift over to the county government. And that essentially aligns with what we already have in the budget. So it's not going to, if it does go through, it's not going to be a change to our bottom line budget. We will just take out the revenue and we'll take out the expenditure. But if for some reason it doesn't go through, we're still requesting for the county to fund this mandate, which is driven by the county government. In addition, I mentioned earlier, there's two grant programs, the Adolescent Single Parenting Program. It's a grant that's awarded by the Prince George's County Department of Social Services. We have an ongoing MOU with that agency, and they provide funding for this program on an annual basis. We also have our JROTC cadet program, where we receive funding to pay for the instructors that supports that work. The amount that we received reimbursement for from the federal government does not fully cover the cost of the positions. There's a local match that's required associated with those positions that has historically been funded by the county. So our position for fiscal year 2026, it was the request in 25 as well, but our position for 26 is that the county restore the funds necessary to fund those two ongoing commitments to make sure it aligns with current legislation or the agreements that we already have in place. So you add in those additional requests, it brings the minimum county contribution, that second blue line, up to approximately $975 million. And then finally, we have two additional requests where we're asking the county to provide financial support. One, related to the Office of Sustainability and Resiliency, as well as the maintenance of retention ponds at various school sites throughout the county. This would increase our total contribution from the county up to $980 million. So that is what our intention will be. That will be reflected in the 26 requested budget. So now I wanted to give just a visual, an overview of our county contributions since fiscal year 2021. So again, reading the chart from left to right, left reflects 21 up through 2026, which is what's reflected in our current budget that we just reviewed a moment ago. The blue bar represents that required contribution, as I mentioned before. Prior to Blueprint in 2023, it was maintenance of effort. Since Blueprint, it's now the local share of the Blueprint programs, but that is the required amount reflected in the blue bars. Then you see energy and telecom as well as any additional county contribution on top of that reflected in the red and the green sections respectively. You then see a purple line going across the top of those that represents the funding on a per pupil basis. So you can see, as a reminder for some folks who may be unfamiliar with what occurred last year during our budgeting cycle, but in fiscal year 2025 budgeting process, legislation was passed to rescind the energy and telecom revenue, where it was no longer going to be above and beyond what's required by the blueprint mandate. Instead, that funding is being redirected towards funding or meeting the minimum county requirement. And so you can see as you get from 24 to 25, there was a dip in our excuse me, in our county contribution where it decreased in 2025. It's going back up in 2026, but we did receive a permanent reduction in our revenue in 25. Our energy and telecom budget for 24 was around 64 million. The proposed budget at the time in fiscal year 25 was around 80 million. So that was revenue that we've had for a while, and obviously we built into our budget commitments, negotiated agreements based off of a funding source. So when you have that kind of a permanent reduction in your revenue, it impacts your school operations. So that has been a permanent change in the funding that's been poured into our schools, and we've been working through this past year to reset our budget, again, trying to minimize the impact of schools and really kind of bear the brunt of those costs, either through efficiencies we were able to gain or just through eliminating certain other cost reductions in the 25 budgeting process. So just wanted to kind of provide this visual of how the county contribution has changed over time. Excuse me while I take a sip of water briefly. All right, so now I wanted to give a bit of an overview of our expenditures and what sort of changed year over year. So when looking at our operating budget expenditures, I really like to look at it in three broad categories. We've got our direct school-based resources, and this reflects the budgets that are at the school cost center level, as well as the funding that we have for our non-public schools as well, which serves our students with disabilities. So that represents around 67% of our total unrestricted budget. We then have kind of the second category that I like to think of is our centrally managed school-based resources. So it is centrally managed, but is in direct support of schools. And this includes things like our school nurses, psychologists, academic interventions, summer school, textbooks, academic coaches, safety and security personnel, building maintenance, custodial services, transportation, just to name a few. But just that kind of gives you an idea. These are all costs that from a budgeting perspective is not necessarily reflected in the school cost center, but it is directly in support of schools and is funded primarily by the blueprint funding that we receive. We do have a separate funding stream for our non-public schools, and then we also have funding for transportation. Just pause for a moment. Both of those funding streams don't fully cover the cost for transportation or the non-publics, but we do have a funding stream for that. But Blueprint primarily covers the cost of these school-based resources. So as it relates to those major Blueprint funding programs that I outlined earlier, the legislation requires that 75% of the funding that we receive for those programs are allocated to the schools. In aggregate, the district, between our direct costs that are at the school cost center level and the ones that are centrally managed, but all school-based, makes up 86% of our unrestricted operating budget. So we're well in excess of that minimum requirement of at least 75%. The remaining 14%, represented by that sliver in burgundy, represents our central office services, which we'll dive into in a little bit more detail. So this slide here provides an overview of the changes in our unrestricted operating budget expenditures year over year at a very, very high level. for each of the different functional areas. So again, going from left to right, you've got your functional area listed. The second column provides the budget for 2026. The third column provides the approved budget for 2025, and then you've got your variance, your change year over year, dollar and percentage wise. As you can see, the overall, and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but in our budget book, which on pages 11 through 13, which sometimes may not be the easiest to understand. There's a lot of content in our budget book, but there's a few pages in there that really highlights what's changing in the budget year over year. This is the same information, but just presented in a different way. So it captures, again, the same information at a very high level, but just functionally a little bit different. So as a reminder, it's important to note the primary driver of our year-over-year changes across all of our functional areas, whether it's at the school level or in a central office, it's driven by our negotiated compensation. We have a budget assumption right now of around $87 million reflected in the budget. And that consists of steps and COLAs across the board for our different labor partnerships. In addition to the negotiated compensation, we also have an increase in direct school supports, primarily due to our lease purchase agreements. That includes textbooks, which falls under academics. That includes the purchase of our buses, which helps to transport our students. That's under transportation. And then we also have technology, where we have our one-to-one devices. That's captured on this chart under other school-based support. We also have the impact of utilities and building maintenance, which is under building services, that's increasing year over year. And then you may recall we had a safety and security enhancement that was initially rolled out in fiscal year 2025. In the 26 budget, we have the second phase of that enhancement reflected in the budget as well. So that's under safety and security. So as you're kind of looking by each functional area, the dollar change and the percentage change, in addition to what I've outlined about negotiated agreements, certain areas also had additional enhancements, and those are some of the highlights at the school level. The last row that you see there, central services and supports, you see there's an increase of 9%, and we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. So as it relates to overall central services and supports, as I mentioned before, it makes up 14% of our unrestricted operating budget. Similar to our school-based supports, there's the impact of negotiated compensation agreements. So even if there were no enhancements, no other changes across other various divisions, there's still going to be an increase because of those negotiated agreements. So there's going to be an increase in every single area due to that. So I'm going to go through some of the highlights here that relates to central services supports. For operations and supporting services, in addition to the impact of the negotiated agreements, there is also the change related to the enhancements for sustainability and resiliency that I just mentioned earlier, that's really tied to progressing the work of the Climate Change Action Plan. And so while we have that as a cost in the budget, it's an enhancement. We also have funding that we're requesting from the county to help support that work. We also have reflected in here the impact of utilities, as I mentioned earlier, being higher across the board. So it's impacting the school budgets. It's also impacting our central office buildings as well. So that is part of the driver of what you see that's increasing under operations and supporting services. In school support and leadership, you actually see a reduction of 4%. So yes, they had the impact of the raises, et cetera. But there were some very intentional changes to look at some of the contractual services, and some of those have been reduced. There have also been changes to supplies and materials, as well as some position reclassification. So that's why you see an overall net reduction for school support and leadership. All right, this next slide has a lot of information on it, so I'll try to speak to it at a really high level. I like to kind of refer to this next bucket as our essential services and supports, and it captures all the core areas required for the district to operate effectively, and it includes finance, accountability, human resources, IT, communications, the Board of Education, Chief of Staff. So again, like all the other areas, you got the impact of negotiated agreements. Even if nothing else changed in the budget, you're going to have that impact reflected in here. But in addition to that, kind of going through each of those areas at a high level, for finance and human resources, you're seeing sort of a flatter increase. And that is due to the fact that, besides the fact there was an impact or an increase related to the negotiated agreements, it was offset by the reduction in some of our contractual services, as well as sort of reevaluating operational efficiency. So you do see the smaller increase for those two areas. For information and technology, you have an increase of 32%. And we've talked about this investment previously as well. This includes a few different items we have going on. Number one, we have the cost of year one implementation of a new ERP system. We have the impact of our student and staff digital tools, as well as synergy licenses. And those two items were both previously funded by ESSER, but now it's being funded with ESSER going away in our unrestricted operating budget. So that is really the main driver behind the 32% increase for IT. For a couple of the other smaller areas, we've got some increases relating to new positions that have been added. At the request for the Board of Education, they're requesting a communications specialist, and the Office of Integrity and Compliance, they're requesting a compliance analyst. But again, that function has revenue reflected in the budget that will be fully funded by the county government. That's our request. And then we have change under other fixed charges as well. Now, this is kind of a catch-all centralized place where we capture a lot of our centrally managed systemic costs that don't necessarily belong in other functional cost centers. This is increasing by 9%, and want to kind of just give some insight into what's driving that. It's primarily due to costs that we have relating to our retiree benefits and blueprint mandates. So first of all, we have our annual funding contribution that's required for other post-employment benefits of $15 million. In our 2025 budget, we were able to forward fund that requirement and paid it early in 2024. But in 2025, we won't have the funds or savings available to be able to pay the 26 commitment early. So it is a year-over-year increase in our 26 budget of $15 million. In addition to that, we have blueprint mandates for workforce development and our pre-K private providers. Both of those items, we receive funding, state and local funding, that is passed through to our partners in this work. And so it's just a straight pass through, but the increase or the impact of that change year over year is reflected under other fixed charges, which again shows up in the CFO's area. So overall, that kind of gives you an insight into the 9% increase due to these various investments that we just discussed. So with that being said, I will pause if there are any questions before we transition over to the amendment process.
Board members, do we have any additional questions? Seeing none. Chief Howell, we will turn it over to you to review our areas with a proposed 10% delta.
Okay, well, that was slides. I'm sorry, I already stopped sharing, but that was slides, the last two slides that I covered off, where I kind of gave a high-level overview of what's changing year over year by functional area and what's kind of driving those changes.
Got it. I thought we had a different document, but that's fine. We'll move on to the next area and I'll find out where that other document is. So we will turn it over to you for our reviewing our budget amendments.
Okie doke. Yeah. All right, so the amendments have been posted on board docs, and we'll just kind of go through in the order that they're listed. to start our review. So they're primarily organized by division. And so we will begin with the Division of Academics. The First Amendment is relating to parent involvement liaisons, and I will turn it over to Dr. White to provide a brief overview of administration's response to this amendment.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. That amendment was put forth by Board Member Moss, where he would like to increase our current Family Support Center in special education by 2 positions. We felt that based on the number of we currently have 4. We have different positions in that office that play a different role because you need a complete group when parent concerns come in. So we have a social worker, we have a parent liaison, and it's 2 additional positions that are there. But we also, just for the group to know, we have parent engagement staff at our schools, and we also have an SEIS. Each SEIS in the Division of Special Education, it's a central office position, manages up to no more than 11 schools, and if it's CSI schools, they have no more than 8. We felt that we have enough support. However, a friendly amendment is that if we were to move forward with this amendment, that we would ask to move forward with 1 and not 2.
Thank you so much, Chief White. Board members, do we have any questions? I'll just give the general statement now. So each board member will have 2.5 minutes to ask their questions and receive an answer, and then unanswered portions within the allotted time will be captured as follow-up. Seeing as we have no questions for the parental involvement liaisons, we can move to special education compliance liaisons.
So this amendment was written by Board Member Briggs, where he felt that based on the audits that we have from MSDE and what we know to be filings from the state as they're looking at our programming around, IEPs and having findings, that he recommended or made an amendment for us to have 2 additional, I think one additional compliance officer. We do feel like we have what we need in terms of compliance. However, compliance is really big for us right now. In full transparency, the number of vacancies is driving the number of compliances. And so we leave this one at the board discretion on whether you want to move forward with adding another position to that office.
Thank you, Chief White. Vice Chair Briggs.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chief White, and thank you, Ms. Howe, and thank you, Chair Goins McCants. So I guess, Dr. White, or really, I guess this might be a Chief Howe question, but I was just curious about feasibility of the salary, because what I don't want it to do is I don't want it to be something where it helps us, but then it harms us in the or I guess actually what I'm saying is I don't want it to be a role that doesn't help us at all. So I think this could be something that in the short term is an investment, but could help us over time. But I'm just curious what your read is on um, Chief Howe as well as Dr. White on like the feasibility of that role and the cost of that role for a specialist, compliance
So
specialist.
I'll answer from a compliance perspective, and then I'll let Chief Howe answer. One thing I did want to mention is you laid out that person will be doing a million things, but know that we already have a job description for compliance office. And so, what I think all of us know is that we are getting beat up right now on compliance. And part of that is if you have a school and you have vacancies, it's easy to miss. Anything can get us a compliance. Anything can get us a finding. And so while we're supporting and while we have structures in place, we constantly have to have a process that monitors that. And sometimes those things lie at the school level. So we put processes in place and then it's schools are implementing. And so when the findings come, when you all get concerns, you push it back to my office and then my office has to go dig to find out what happened. That's where our compliance specialists come in. Know that for many cases, I have to have a compliance person that sits in certain IEP meetings. right? And so right now, what I'm saying is for the entire district, for the amount of special education students we have, right now we have 2. And so that's why we're leaving this one up to the board, because I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, while we do know we have it covered, right now we still have findings. And so I'll let Chief House speak to the portion as it reflects to the budget.
Thank you. So just relating to the cost and the budgeting for any new position, obviously we'll go through and we'll work with human resources, compensation and classification to determine the funding that should be tied to the position, and that, if it is approved and added to the budget, it will be included in the budgeting process. But as we just, review any changes that we make to the budget at this point, it's going to require us to go back and figure out what we're going to cut in order to keep the budget balanced. And so we're just very mindful of that as we're kind of going through this process. Overall, we've got, amendments totaling over $10 million or close to $10 million. And so as we're going through each one by one, it's going to be a zero-sum game. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to be able to offset it in order to keep the balance, to keep the budget balanced. To the other point around, vacancies, we never really know, especially when we're adding a new position, the likelihood of being able to fill that role. And so we don't add a vacancy factor. Every time we add a new position, we add the position assuming it's going to be filled from day one. As we get into the year, we may then realize that assumption is maybe a bit idealistic. And if it doesn't realize or doesn't materialize, we will then make some adjustments to a vacancy factor. But if we add it to the budget, we will assume it's going to be fully funded, fully filled at the beginning of the year, and hope for the best. So that's kind of where we are on that on a budget standpoint.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think the biggest piece for me, and I don't see a timer, so I'm going to keep talking until I see how much time I got. But I think the biggest piece for me is just around what I want to do is be fiscally responsible with the request that I'm making. So if this is saving us money and if this is reducing the amount of compliance issues that we have, which are costs to the school because they have to address any legal concerns that exist, then I think that if that outweighs the salary that we'll pay for someone for a year, then that may be a good investment. And it sounds like, Dr. White, you're saying, yes, we could have another set of eyes on these things and it could help with the more efficiency. But I guess the piece that I feel like is missing is just the numbers around the impact of this role and the ability to actually cut some costs or save some money, however small that might be.
And what I would say is, even if we add it, doesn't mean that we're going to be out of compliance, right? And so, and the other thing that we need to understand with special education, maintenance of effort. So everything we add, we have to maintain. So we're at a point until we are able to secure staffing to make sure that our schools have what they need to put us in a better position to monitor and get better over time. We could add it and it could definitely be a help, but it could be, we still have the same amount of findings, if not more next year, based on just where we are, because they help school staffs when we are trying to figure out and move us out of, certain situations.
Okay. So maybe I can just reach out to you offline and have a discussion about like how to make this make sense, if it makes sense at all.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Briggs and Dr. White. Moving on to our next amendment, which is the Safe Summers Boot Camp pilot.
So this is Board Member Moss, and he wanted to do a program at Suitland and Crossland High School to allow them to have a summer experience to incorporating college and federal government visits to promote continuous learning. What I would say, Board Member Moss, is that really wouldn't be in academics or come through my office. Schools have the ability to have summer enrichment programs. So in reality, you would be giving this money to the schools, and the schools would have to find someone in their building who is an amazing staff member that wants to have a program for 50 students and organize, plan, and run this program. And so I don't see Dr. Davis here. She and I did discuss this one, but it would be a matter of seeing if those two schools were interested in those programs. What I will tell you about Suitland High School was scheduled to have a bridge program. However, Suitland High School will be moving in the summer. And so what they didn't know when they planned originally their own summer bridge program is at that time, we're in the process of having our summer meetings, is that their building won't be available. By now, they're probably knowing that. So if they're watching that, this should not be a shock. So that's something to think about. And then additionally, Crossland we'll be having a CTE summer bridge program for our ninth graders coming in. And so our friendly amendment is that as a part of that program, because it's only like a week based on the amount of students, we're going to split that cohort in half, is that we can potentially look at a day where we explore, maybe take them on a college visit or have something. But we are already from my office working with the school. The school is already establishing a summer bridge program because it's a specialty program.
Board Member Moss.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. White, for the clarification. I appreciate your team's work on this. Dr. Davis, who you were trying to call, did reach out to me about an opportunity to be able to support this work. This is new information to me, so you don't have to answer this today. We can talk about it offline, but I'd like to know if we have some type of contingency plan in place for students at Suitland High School to still be able to have that if we could do some bridge work at another facility, perhaps.
Happens. So right now, that's what normally happens. Right now, they're just in the beginning phases of planning their program. They put in for their own program to be at Suitland. By now, they would have met with my staff because what my team facilitates all the summer programs. So they're doing all the coordinating of efforts across offices. We would have received from Dr. Coleman's team what facilities will be available or not. So they will have the opportunity to seek another site to see, but we wanted you to know that they already were programs planned. So I didn't know if you really needed to put money towards either of those efforts. And what we can do is keep you posted on what is decided and what they're able to come up with in terms of another location.
Appreciate your team's work on this. Yeah, Dr. Davis did hit me up, so I just wanted to say she has another source for this too. So just for the public, I'll probably be holding this until we have a conversation before I try to ask the board to consider it.
Thank you both so much. Our next amendment is aviation program continuation.
Good evening. This one was from board member Goins McCants, and she was interested in doing a Jacob's Ladder Aviation Career Exploration Program and tutoring assistance expansion to Friendly High School. So this is an example of it wouldn't fall under CTE because we don't have aviation at that school. Our aviation site is located at certain schools. This will be another example of if a staff member at Friendly High School or that staff was interested in running and hosting a summer enrichment program, we would again work with Dr. Davis to work with the school to see if they are interested and can find someone that will run that program.
Got it. So this one wasn't a summer program. It is a program for the school year and asking for continuation of the budget so that they will be able to offer it again for next year without removing their funding.
Sure. So when I followed up with CTE, this was not one of our programs. So we're not sure where their funding is coming from.
Got it.
Now, what I can do is I can communicate with the school and find out for you how that came about, and then communicate with Chief Howe, who can communicate back so that they can see if that funding source was available. But it was not from my office.
Got it. Thank you so much. Board members, any additional questions? Moving on to the Ombudsman's office.
Sure. So in the past, Prince George's County Public Schools did have an ombudsman's office, and that office was dismantled. When that office was dismantled, those positions moved to the area office. There were 3. They are now called resolution specialist, one supporting elementary, one supporting middle school, one supporting high school. While the amendment asked for it to be around special education, and this amendment came forward from Board Member Briggs, know that resolution specialist that is already in place handles all concerns that come in for schools. So we wouldn't want to have a separate person just to handle special ed, because now you have too many hands in a pot trying to engage with schools. Remember, we already have the Family Support Center, where that is strictly about special education concerns that come in, but we already have resolution specialists who communicate concerns. The only friendly amendment we have made to this, because right now we currently have one for Area 1, Area 2, and Area 3, is if in fact you wanted to proceed, to only ask for one and put it at Area 1, because we have triple the amount of elementary schools than we do to middle and high schools. Right. So, but we don't really need an office. And what I would say is that while there was a board policy, which should have happened but did not happen, is that board policy should have been rescinded when that office was dismantled.
Perhaps that's the discussion, and I apologize, because that was actually a conversation I didn't get to have with your office. I just want to say that for note, but it was something that I wanted to get in so that whether I was wrong or right, if I was right, then we can move forward with it. But
Well, right, there was a policy and there was an office. The office got dismantled. The policy didn't go away, but the positions moved to the area to be a conduit of those parent concerns that come in, to be direct communication with those schools to try to help move problems across the system and resolve.
okay, great. Well, then maybe that's another one that I'll have offline, because I want to clarify, and I think that may be also for the P&G committee. There are some things I didn't know there. So thank you for that one.
Sure.
Board members, if there are no additional questions, we will move on to third grade literacy lab pilot.
Sure, this is Board Member Moss for Suitland Elementary and District Heights. And what we wanted you to know, he is interested in potentially having a literacy lab. And so what we wanted you to know first and foremost is that both of those schools have an ELST from my office. So an ELST is an early literacy support teacher. We probably figured you may not have known that. That goes to that school, supports the school, does lessons where the teachers can shadow watch. They support the teachers in their growth. They work and sit in collaborative planning. They're working with those teachers in structured literacy, so that way we can ensure the instruction in that building is moving forward. Also, additionally, because I believe it's District Heights is a CSI school, they have an opportunity to have amplified tutoring during the day. However, our friendly amendment is that Board Member Briggs has us in a partnership, not has us because we enjoy them, in a partnership with the University of Maryland in Mile, where we are piloting, and we still say pilot even though we're in year 2, piloting with a couple of schools near University of Maryland. And so our friendly amendment is that we're trying to reach out to the University of Maryland to see if in fact we could potentially add these 2 schools, especially around the parent component. Would they have a problem with that based on the distance, because they use a lot of their students? What I will say, and Board Member Briggs, you may have a better answer, just where we are, don't know if that's federal grant. I don't know any implications that could have towards all of us. But if in fact it proceeds, if in fact you want to move forward, now that you also know the additional supports we have there, maybe looking at how we can add them to what's currently going on. But we need to also then wait, if University of Maryland is willing, to see how much they would charge us to add them to the pilot.
Dr. Moss?
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually just saw DJ Bolger. He was singing your praises. We were at the Capitol together, so I've known him for a bit. He was singing your praises and the work of the 2 models. And I just fundamentally believe that those 2 schools need that additional support, that tutorial work layered around it. All of my work in literacy just shows that we're really going to move outcomes, particularly at Suitland Elementary School. I have some grave concerns about our literacy outcomes. I think they're doing really great work, but I think if we're going to move the needle, it's having student support. So I would like to see us extend this pilot. Just to be forward with you, I actually would like to see this be across the entire district at some point, but I think a next good logical step is to come down to the central part of the county. I will tell you, I talked to DJ Bolger and his folks. I'll let you all do your real magic work, but I'm like, I hope y'all can figure this out for us. But thank you all for looking into this. But this is precisely what I wanted to do, was to extend the literacy lab work that's already happening in Board Member Briggs's district. I think it's time to take that pilot off pilot and run it in full speed, because I think it's doing really great work. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add there.
Just to provide context of why we were still calling it a pilot, and board member Briggs is aware of this because he and I stay in touch around this. Oftentimes when you're dealing with grants and you're dealing with our own internal processes, by the time we got up and actually running, we missed months. And so we didn't have a full year to say, hey, this part of the project was great, we should expand. We wanted, so we're trying to really get a full year. By the time we get to next year, we won't. But again, my team has reached out to University of Maryland. We're waiting to hear back from them, to hear back from the cost and expansion again. And then just so you know, if they're willing, what we would then do is cycle back to you to say, they provided us with a menu of services and what service do we want? So for example, if we know we already have an ELST there and we're working with the teachers, maybe there's around the parent engagement and how do we build that capacity to wrap around the school so that students are getting support at school and at home. So we'll see what they give us back, and then I will cycle back to have this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much. And thank you for your team's work on this. This is one of those things that I don't think people know about, that you all are doing a really great job with, of building our literacy infrastructure. And so I think this also gave an opportunity to highlight some of the work that your team is doing. But thank you, and I look forward to getting that additional feedback.
Vice Chair Briggs, you put your hand down, or?
Yeah, I think they covered it. So, yep.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. I believe our next department, Chief Howell, would be accountability.
Yes, I will turn it over to Dr. Strader to review the amendments for his area.
Perfect. The first amendment is, it says expansion, but it should probably be continuation of Hillside HWSC program.
All right, so good evening, everyone. This particular amendment was brought to us by Board Member Goins McCants. Thank you for the consideration here. I would like to, we can address both of these. So for this item, as well as the next item, the LAYC, these are two items that are the budget flows through the Strategic Initiatives Office. These were two programs particular for addressing the needs of our Hispanic communities anyway, and these are two wonderful programs as you have identified. So for focusing on Hillside in particular, the request is for additional $216,000 to be added to an existing grant. The concern that we have, there's two that with this particular proposal. One is the question for the proposal is to include two additional schools, Crossland High School and Thurgood Marshall, to the services that are rendered under this contract. And a bit of a question that we need to sidebar perhaps on, these two schools are included in that contract. So there's actually, there says in addition to the 5 other county schools, there's 7 that's a member of this. So these two schools are included. So we can talk, if it perhaps wasn't these two particular schools and there's other 2 schools of interest, we can talk to clarify that. But the other piece to this is this $215,000, we're looking to, this contract is still existing, but we're looking to in the future possibly involve this in our community schools contracts to support. So we're looking for other opportunities in the future. But that's the reason. Until we can clarify the schools that are interested, that are part of this contract, I'm not sure where to go with this. Also, one other piece, I said there's 2. The second piece to this is hearing from my colleagues, I believe this was also addressed perhaps at the county council level for the county council improvement grant. I believe there was a similar ask at their level for supporting these efforts. I'm not sure where that is. So either way, there's a couple pieces to look at here. So if there's anything else, any questions you have specific to Hillside, I can address that. The LAYC piece of it, because again, both of these are somewhat related to the same item string, I think you're questioning. The LAYC piece, the trouble we have with adding to this contract is this existing contract ends June of 2025. So this contract will no longer be in place as we move forward into the next fiscal year. So we would look to either conduct an RFP for this within its current situation, but more than likely we would try to move this work over to our community schools work and then have this work funnel through their efforts. Because both these programs were instilled prior to the enactment of community schools. So this was our area of support. So I'm willing to entertain questions for 2 of these since I combined the 2 amendments. Hopefully you'd have more time to address the questions that you have.
Absolutely. Maybe we do need to have an additional conversation about them because from my understanding, those schools weren't included in the contract. So more conversation around the um, contract and explicitly what it says, especially with the LAYC if that contract is expiring. So
Mhm.
definitely want to connect with you on those to make sure that we are not losing what I'm hearing from principals are very vital programs across the
Mhm.
district. Um, Board members, do we have any additional questions on either of those two amendments? Seeing none, moving on to grant expert.
Okay, so again, thank you for the question. The grant expert, this was introduced by Board Member Briggs. The request here was to add a grants expert to the current grants team, which is included in the Strategic Planning and Resource Management Office. There are currently within that branch of that office, there is a supervisor and 3 specialists that manage our grants, in particular, including, or I should say, in addition to managing all of our entitlement grants, Title I, II, III, going through all of those and the application process and all the federal submissions, state submissions for those, the office also brings in about $10 million in grants outside of those, outside of all the entitlement grants. So it's a lot of work flowing through that office. I appreciate the interest in that additional position for the office. They would definitely be appreciative of the effort. The only thing that I would share here is, one, there's considerable costs associated with an additional position, but 2, one of the problems that we run into is we find the grants money, but securing the grant is only the first part of the process. Having all of the other offices be able to manage all of the other responsibilities associated with grants, that becomes part of the problem, as far as trying to manage the over $10 million in grant funds that we are currently securing. So again, it's a lot of work on the recipients of the grants to get through all their compliance measures on this. And also, the other issue that we often run into is the needs of the district. As we look to secure these grants funds, oftentimes there's matching requirements of the district to match the funds and so forth. So either way, I can say we would definitely more than likely get the value out of that additional position and what we're securing with the grants. But again, the burden also falls on all of my other colleagues and the offices that are receiving these monies to be able to manage that additional grant fund. So it's always that plus and minus. So I could be in support of this if we could find the monies for this. So I was just putting it out there and giving you the full story.
Vice Chair Briggs.
Thanks so much, Chair Goins McCants, and thanks so much, Dr. Strader, for those words. It's good to know at least that it would be helpful. And I think during these challenging times that our district and our state is faced with, and potentially our nation, with everything that's happening at the federal level, I think coming by money and being able to really cover the costs that are essential to ensure that our students are moving in the direction that we know is going to improve them academically, socially, looking at the whole child, was really the intent behind that specific um, request. However, something that I want to apologize for is because I've done this with HR. I haven't done it with you or academics, which is having a conversation with your offices to really figure out what's the right role. And I think that's something that if there's flexibility there, I would want to do is figure out how can we address the problem that I'm hoping to solve for, which is how can we get additional funds to schools to cover costs, given that we're going to be facing, continued deficits at the state level, at the county level. And what is that role or those roles that would be within the kind of scope of a reasonable amount of money for either a part-time or full-time role. So maybe that's something that we could have as like a continuation discussion, is tweaking it to really fit what would actually benefit your office and not just having a role for the sake of having a role, but something that would actually have some impact.
Point taken. And again, that is one of the foci of that office, to try to make those dollars as operational and relevant as possible when we're seeking these grants. And again, that office only focuses on grants of 25,000 or more. Schools themselves, one of the things like this office has done, they produced a manual for being able to secure their own grants. And so it's tutoring, would you say, to make available to schools and anyone else from any other office that's applying for grants, because they do a lot of PD work with the other offices to try to make them partners, would we say, in the elevation of grant dollars flowing through our district. So that is one of their charges already within that office. So, again, this would help them as far as the human resources are concerned. But your charge, I believe, is being addressed. But could it be improved upon with the additional staff members? Absolutely.
Great. We can have an offline, hopefully.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Our next amendment is the grants management assessment.
Okay, so for the grants management assessment, this was also Board Member Briggs, I believe. No, management, yes, grant management. I'm just making sure I'm looking at the right item here. The intent here is to look at partnering with some third party to be able to work with the grants office to look for efficiencies. There's mentions of document reviews, interviews, on-site strategic planning sessions, follow-up reporting. Again, looking to partner with another entity to help identify greater efficiencies within the office. The amount for this was $15,000. I'm questioning that amount to be able to have some type of contractual service. That's a minimal amount. Seeing these type of partnerships in other areas, most are $50,000 to $75,000 range. So I just want to put that out there that it may be more than what we're looking at here as we get through this. But either way, I did wish to share in 2024, we did a somewhat similar internal review of our practices and processes, and we ended up securing a management tracking system within the grants office using the QuickBase software. So we do have some technology in place to be able to track from the application through securing through closeout process of all of our grants. The platform is, again, managed by the SPRM office. And again, that's now their foundation for the work that they do as far as securing the grants are concerned. And I also mentioned earlier the grants guide that the office has produced, increasing any stakeholder within a district or even outside, increasing their knowledge of the proposal development and grants management process, from start to finish. So they've done a lot of work in this area, but we would always, embrace, continuous improvement processes. But again, here, my greatest concern was looking at this budgeted cost. I think I think the 15,000 is an underestimate of where we would be.
Vice Chair Briggs.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you again. First, thank you, Chair Goins-McCants, and I want to say thank you again, Dr. Strader. And the good news, and again, that we can have this offline, but the good news is that would love to set up a conversation with your office with someone who actually quoted that number around that specific set of services that they would provide the district. And so there may be a partnership that is of interest, but that was the quoted amount. And that's something that I'm hoping, if that is actually, if they can live up to the promise and live up to the vetting process for the office, then that could be something that could be potentially a good partnership. So would love to just have like a 2.0 discussion about that, and you all can have a discussion with the person that I'm considering. The other thing I want to say is that I really loved, and this just might be feedback, and I know this is kind of off track, but I have a minute and 46 seconds. So I just want to say that I like, we had the whole like budget process last time with the sheets, and we could give you all details. And one of the things I wanted to do this time was have an appendix of like additional things. So you would have had that information if it weren't the spreadsheet, which I thought was great. But I'm going to share that with you as well. So you'll have like the additional information. And then if you're interested in a meeting with this company, then we can make that happen. But that would be, that was a quoted number from an actual company that works on grants management.
The only concern I would have for that is we would have to be careful of the procurement process of outside services, right? So we would more than likely have to go through an RFP process with that. So we would just need to make sure we wouldn't create any conflicts that may resolve in such a conversation. So we would just need to follow the rules for that. But yeah, be very interested.
Okay, great. Well, yes. So I will definitely take the right steps. But thank you for flagging that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you both so much. Our last amendment also covers the Office of Integrity and Compliance. So I don't know if we have somebody from them as well, if you all would both like to speak on it. But this is our last amendment for this section is the strategy offices merger.
I'm not sure about integrity and compliance.
That's just what's on my list, but
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so for this particular one, the interest here was in looking at the roles of the Strategic Initiatives Office and the strategic, and there's strategic in both these names, and the Strategic Planning and Resource Management Office. And there's always confusion of the roles and responsibilities for these two offices, questioning whether there's overlap in the responsibilities. The Strategic Planning and Resource Management Office is the office that manages our strategic planning, which is our Transformation 2026, the development of our strategic plan, progress monitoring, closeout of our strategic plan. It also includes our grants office, the grants acquisition side of the grants office. The other side, the fiscal side of the grants office, is in Chief Howell's office. So that office has had a long history within the district, again, managing, monitoring our strategic plan, as well as grants acquisitions. During COVID, we ran into all the compliance reporting associated with COVID, our school reopening plan, all the ESSER grants, Maryland League grants, everything that was associated with the pandemic and the outputs of that. To deal with that, our prior superintendent created the Strategic Initiatives Office to address those compliance needs in particular, to work through those grant application processes and so on and so forth. Also during that time, however, Maryland legislation passed the blueprint legislation. So that became this additional beast that required, again, the planning, compliance reporting, and so forth associated with it. So we had two separate offices having two distinct functions. However, they both have the word strategic within their titles. So now we are moving forward into 2026. We're closing out our current strategic plan, and we need to close out the current blueprint plan and create the next version of blueprint, which is due in 2027. So the district, now the stars are aligning. Our new strategic plan is going to be due. Our blueprint plan is going to be due. So there is interest in combining the efforts of these two offices that are associated with blueprint or strategic planning office. So we are already moving forward in our thinking and our alignment of these two offices to maximize the efficiencies in pulling this off. However, I must say, the work that's involved in creating and progress monitoring our strategic plan, as well as supporting blueprint and facilitating all the offices and blueprint reporting, and we've heard about all the nuances and blueprint funding and so on and so forth. This has been a real beast. And between those two offices, there's been requests to actually expand these roles. However, what I'm hoping is moving forward by looking to potentially do some restructuring and combining the efforts of these two offices, we can get those resources through that combined effort. However, unfortunately, I don't see a savings per se in either the staffing or resources. I believe this will be fairly cost neutral in this effort, but that's where we're standing now, and that's how we're looking to address this. There were some specifics shared within the budget request from Board Member Moss that aren't quite clear to me, and how to look at this and looking at staffing and so on. I wish to tease those out, but I'm just sharing we're already looking at this. We already see this as a potential, for continuous improvement efforts. And again, 2026, you're going to see a lot of information coming out in our visiting our new strategic plan as well as our new blueprint. So sharing that, I'll turn it over to any questions.
Board members, do we have any additional questions? Seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time it took to go through these and also for the feedback you gave us. Our next office is our board office. So Chief Howell, are you?
Sorry. Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. Sorry about that. So I will handle the first one with regards to a board budget analyst. This amendment was submitted by, I think, Brandon Jackson, Board Chair Jackson, and it's around the support for the board throughout the year-long budgeting process to ensure the board and board members efficiently and effectively spend tax dollars. So just want to come provide a little bit of background. Back during the fiscal year 23 budget formulation process, there was a budget and fiscal affairs position that was eliminated by board leadership and board members at the time, with regards to that particular work. Since then, we've obviously continued to provide support from a budget standpoint through the budget office function. We've got our finance function in general. We have our internal audit function. And then now we have this county mandated integrity and compliance office, all with the goal of ensuring that we are efficiently and effectively spending limited tax dollars. And so not quite certain of what the expectation would be with this position. And while the work of the budget office is a heavy lift and it is a full-time year-round responsibility, I'm not sure of the level of work that would be involved with sort of analyzing and trying to understand the budget once it's been formulated and it's been presented and shared publicly with board members and constituents. We work closely with similar budget analyst positions with the county that are responsible for this type of work, but they do it for all of their agencies, not just one. In this case, PGCPS is just one, but they have this type of function for all their agencies to help provide support in understanding budget changes and ongoing operations at a high level summary to support the county council members. The work that's involved with that relies heavily on the budget office. So when they're trying to analyze and they're trying to understand, they're not doing it independent. It requires input, analysis, support from the budget team in order to help with that level of understanding. So our concern is just on the level of effectiveness in a position like this on a year-round basis in trying to provide the support that the board is looking for in a way that can be efficient. I don't necessarily see how that can be done independent of heavy support from the budget office and the finance function in general. We're a really large, extremely complex organization, and really to understand the budget, you have to understand the operations. And so a lot of the work that the budget team does is spending time with the programs, the division chiefs and all their team members to understand the operations so we can then understand the financial impact. And so our friendly amendment is just around maybe consideration of a better representation or presentation of the information that is publicly shared in the budget book, in our financial reviews, and our other published documents. So it's easier to digest and to understand and provide a level of transparency that will help board members feel comfortable in having the insight that they're looking to see. Maybe this could be done through leveraging a contracted service on a short-term basis just to evaluate what that could look like. We talked before in one of the work sessions previously about making changes to the budget book and working collaboratively to do that. We really want to be able to partner better with the board to make sure the information is presented in a way that's useful, that's understandable, and that's impactful to help support decision-making.
Thank you, Chief Howell. Director Fitzpatrick.
Thank you so much. While this, of course, is Chairman Jackson's proposed amendment, in discussing it with him, because he's not here tonight, I think the goal is first off realizing, as you said, Chief Howell, that the budget process is not a seasonal process, it is, of course, a year-long process. And when speaking in collaboration, I love you said collaboration with the budget office, and speaking in collaboration with the budget office, the goal is to make sure that there is a person for the Board of Education that can make sure that their input is collected, seen, and delivered in a timely manner to make the process smoother. There have been a couple of things that and to Director Smith's kudos, if you would, the process has gotten smoother every year. But the goal is to make sure that this process is as seamless as possible by making sure that there is somebody, making sure that they're collecting the board's feedback early, looking at all the questions that the board members have, making sure that they're analyzing that, fleshing that out before it comes to you all so that you all can have a fully thought out, if you would, amendment and input from the board. Not taking away anything from what you said. Again, this is Chairman Jackson's amendment, but in speaking with him, that was the goal. And you mentioned as an amendment, possibly doing the contracted service. There are a couple of concerns with the contracted service. One is that, of course, the budget process is a year-long process. And the second is one thing that we run into with contracted services is that the people who have the talent are very marketable and are not always looking to have a seasonal position. And so even for this year, that was one of the struggles that we had in getting started a little bit late, was trying to find someone with the talent who was also willing to take a contracted or seasonal position.
Thank you so much, Director Fitzpatrick. Seeing no questions from board members, and feel free to raise your hand if you had something that you wanted to add. We'll move on to our second board amendment, district liaisons, board office amendment, excuse me.
Yes, so with this one, similar to the other position in the fiscal year 23 budget formulation process, the district liaison positions were eliminated. And I think it was just really trying to restructure the board office in a way that was more efficient and effective in being able to support the work. So with this request to add back 3 positions at $475,000, I think our primary concern is just around the value tied to that investment, and knowing that we don't necessarily have an offset to be able to support this. It would be an incremental request that would require reductions elsewhere in order to support this effort. And so I always get a little concerned with bringing back positions that were, I'm assuming at the time, well thought out when it came to the restructuring, that the roles weren't needed. And now you have change in leadership, and now the roles are being brought back. Because it has employee impacts when you kind of bring a position back and then you later eliminate it and you possibly bring it back and then go through the changes again. So just really want to be careful about the consideration of adding back these 3 positions and how we would actually fund it. It would just add to the deficit that we already feel like we're in a pretty good place to be able to close that gap. But as we just reviewed and saw earlier, 86% of our budget is supporting schools, and the remaining 14% is not a lot, is already covering core central office services. And so it will have to be funded by some other cut. So just consideration of the offset and being able to have this added to the budget.
Thank you, Chief Howell. Board members, do we have any questions on this amendment? Director Fitzpatrick?
Just again, this was, I can share what was shared in the process from Chairman Jackson. I think the goal was making sure that the board members were able to do their job most effectively and efficiently. Of course, I cannot speak to the looming, the word I use, deficit that we have. But what I will say with the goal for these positions was to make sure that when we look at the org chart all the time and we see the superintendent, and then above the board, above the superintendent, we see the board. But where is an understood piece above the board is really the constituents. And the chairman's goal there is to make sure that the board is being held accountable by constituents and are really hearing their voice in all the things that are happening, and making sure that we are an all elected board now. We are no longer a board of, appointees or retirees. And so most of our board members have full-time jobs, and his goal was to make sure that they had as much support as they could to do the job effectively while representing the people who elected them.
Thank you so much, Director Fitzpatrick. Vice Chair Brown?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Goins McCants. Thank you so much, Chief Howell, for the explanation. What I will say, and this is just a call out from constituents and myself and Vice Chair Briggs, we are looking to possibly have some sort of webinar or some sort of education that is built for our constituents to fully understand the amendment process and the budget process. Because the feedback essentially is when they watch us or you all, or it's always at a high level, and they would really like for it to come down just a little bit for them to actually understand the process a lot easier. And this is definitely something, like I said, myself and Vice Chair Briggs are working on, but we would love to team up with your team to see how we could eliminate the confusion. And I'm not saying we're gonna wave a magic wand and fix everything. However, I will say that it's definitely a call out. And I can see, to Chair Jackson's point, why he would want additional support for things like that, because that is something that definitely takes time. But if you already have somebody in your office who is willing to put the extra work in outside of all the wonderful work that you all are doing, we would really like to have a conversation with them to hopefully assist in the education portion when it comes to our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Brown. Board members, do we have any additional questions or comments on district liaisons? Seeing none, our third budget amendment for the board office is our board member budget reduction.
Yes, I can speak to that one as well. And then Director Fitzpatrick may have something additional to chime in. I'm not sure if Board Member Walker is here. But this was submitted by Board Member Walker, and it was to look at reducing board members' individual budgets by $500 each, resulting in a total reduction of $4,500 across the board. Our focus has really been, across the board, looking at all central offices and discretionary spend, but specifically relating to travel. We want to ensure that the board members' budgets aligns with Education Article 3003-1003, which basically specifically outlines and says that board members are allowed to be reimbursed for travel and other expenses not to exceed $7,000. So we want to ensure that the budgets that we have for board members aligns with that. But also we want to make sure, and it does right now, we have individual budgets loaded for each board member's cost center, but also to ensure that the budget that's in the board office is not being utilized in addition to what board members are allowed in accordance with the education article. So we are looking at that. We've been working closely with our team to evaluate and assess whether or not the budget in the board office for travel specifically is where it needs to be to support the staff members in the board office only.
Director Fitzpatrick?
Yes, thank you. Of course, I will not get into the legality of our board handbook and whether or not that is, I'll leave that to the attorneys. However, what I will say is, for board member Walker's perspective, it was just that, hey, we have a deficit. As a board member, I want us to do our part. And this is a quote, like her, as a board member, I want to do our part and just find a reduction where we, in their budget as well. And I will say that that is not more than what is typically left over in a board member budget, looking at the data. But her part was just, hey, we have to find some money somewhere, and we want to do our part as part of the team.
Thank you so much, Director Fitzpatrick. Board members, do we have any questions or comments on this amendment? Seeing none, thank you so much, Chief Howell and Director Fitzpatrick. We will move on to the office of our communications amendments, starting with Communications Office Staff Reduction.
Thank you. Yes. So this amendment was proposed by Board Chair Walker to reduce one of the vacant positions in communications. And so in October of 2024, I presented a communications plan to the Board of Education, which outlined the charge of providing a more consistent level of services to support families across our community. The plan is available at pgcps.org under Offices, selecting Communications and Community Engagement. As a part of this presentation, I outlined the need to assess the division for efficiencies and proper supports. With that in mind, we reviewed the different buckets of the division and considered budget constraints while considering job function. As a result, I put forth the elimination of the stated position of Senior Public Relations Specialist to do a cost-neutral change that would support the creation of a language access coordinator within the Office of Interpretation and Translation. So to be clear, this would help meet the growing demand for language access services because we serve 76,000 international students and families representing a diverse range of languages and cultures. The volume and complexity of translation and interpretation requests continue to grow to meet communicative needs, and so requiring additional coordination to streamline processes and ensure efficiency. The OIT has experienced a steady annual increase in interpreting requests with a consistent steady increase in requests from FY24 to FY25. In addition, this would help ensure compliance with Maryland HB 44 Special Education Translations, which mandates the translation of individualized education programs, IEPs, and individualized family service plans, IFSPs, and all peripheral special education documents in the family's native languages. To that end, PGCPS must ensure accurate and timely translations to comply with this legislation and uphold the rights of multilingual families. So a dedicated coordinator would monitor compliance, improve translation timelines, less than 30 days, liaise with contracted services for translations in lower incidence languages, and support seamless communication between families and schools. Lastly, this would just overall strengthen interpretation services for schools and central offices with 201 schools and a multitude of outward-facing central office departments that engage with families. The addition of this coordinator is central to aligning interpreting services for critical family engagement efforts. From board education meetings to CTE parent outreach events and every meeting in between, OIT touches all facets of PGCPS to ensure language accessibility. So as PGCPS embraces the richness of its multilingual communities, we must continue to prioritize resources that reflect this commitment. Timely, high-quality interpretation ensures equitable access to school resources, meetings, and decision-making processes for parents and guardians. I would also just note that a communication specialist is already included in the proposed budget for the board office without this elimination and transfer of position.
Thank you, Chief Morales. Vice Chair Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chief Morales. I had a question. You said we had 76,000 students that we service, I guess, for language interpretations. Do you know how many of those students, as far as like the ratio, like we have X amount who speaks this language, X amount who speaks that language, and are we covering all of those languages when it comes to interpretation services?
Absolutely. So I don't want to give you exact numbers. I can definitely follow up, but absolutely, we consider all languages, cover every language. Sometimes we work with contractors for the less common languages, but that is where the org chart can be a bit misleading because we do deal with a lot of part-time interpreters, translators, and things of that nature. But I can get you some data.
Thank you. I think it would be important for us to spot out if there is a language we are not servicing, then I can see where we would possibly invest in, support for that. So if we if there's out of 76 students, 76,000 students, if there's 10 languages and we're only servicing 9 of those languages, then I can see why we would need additional support for the 10th language. But I would really like that information. Thank you.
Yeah, and to be perfectly clear, we support every language. We will find a way because we have to, right? We have to communicate with our families. What this position speaks more so to is the coordination and sheer volume of incoming requests, which we track and has consistently grown. And so this position would help streamline these requests to reduce wait times, to provide efficiency in exactly what you're talking about, so that there's less wait for our families, even when we have to make those take those additional steps to cover a language.
I'm sorry. Are we doing rounds? I apologize. I had a follow-up.
No, you can go ahead with your follow-up.
Yes, so when these initial requests come in, I'm assuming they're coming from the school level. And is the school reaching out to you all asking for those services?
Yes, we have a system where they can submit the request and everything is documented from start to finish. There is a system and that system is utilized not just by the schools, but also the offices.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Brown. Our second communications amendment was elimination of the Chief of Communications position.
So I can speak to that request. And so when we produced the fiscal year 26 proposed superintendent's proposed budget, that was a snapshot as of a point in time based off the budget that existed, or the formulation that existed through the fall up until the time the book was published in December. Since then, that position has already been eliminated, along with the senior advisor position has been eliminated. And so when we produce subsequent budget books, those changes will be made. But by the time that budget book was produced, that position was still in place. So I think when it was reviewed by I think the amendment request came from board member Walker. She was looking at a point in time, but that'll be reflected in subsequent budget book updates with that position reflecting already being eliminated. That along with the secretary that supported that division chief role.
Thank you. I'm going to raise my hand because this one is a bit of a question, just an add-on to that. When we have those minor, well, in that case, not very minor, but those changes to the proposed budget in between when budget books are produced, is there a way that we as a board can be notified of what those are so that we can avoid situations? Again, board member Walker is not here to speak to it if that was her actual intention, but just so that we can be aware of it and not have duplicate requests and amendments for things that are already happening.
Yeah, I will say this, the budget is stale the second that you finalize it because it's an iterative process that changes every day, all the time. So you would be receiving notices on a frequent basis about changes in budget assumptions, maybe positions, things that have changed. Granted, this one is visible because it's a pretty substantial position, but there's a lot of other things that happen in between as well. And so our best way to communicate those changes are really reflected when we produce the subsequent budget books, because there's many of them, they're varied. But even after the budget is approved, there might be things that we subsequently change for whatever reason that won't necessarily be reflected in a published document. But we do our best to try to inform and engage as we get into a forum like this to say, hey, this has been a subsequent change, but there's been several since we published that budget book where things have changed. So it's just, it is an iterative process. And so we just ask for your patience as those books are published and reproduced, and as more information becomes available, we try to reflect it in each subsequent document.
Much appreciated. Board members, do we have any additional questions on elimination of Chief of Communications position? Seeing none, thank you so much, Chief Morales and Chief Howell. We will move on to Human Resources with Amendment Number 1, Research Study to Improve Talent Pool.
Yeah, I don't believe Dr. Baldwin is here, but her responses are provided in the document on board docs. I click on the first one. This was presented by Board Member Jackson. It's an additional FTE for approximately $146,000. I mean, I don't know if you want me to read the responses that she provided in here, but essentially, I'm sorry, am I on the correct? I'm sorry. I've got multiple tabs. I'm clicked on the wrong one. Okay, sorry, this was submitted by Board Member Briggs for $84,000 is the impact associated with it. She's provided a pretty thorough and detailed response. Not sure if Board Member Briggs had any follow-up questions or any clarity that's needed with regards to that, or anything he may want to add associated with it, but
If we could have just a general overview of the response for the public who is watching, and then we'll turn it over to Board Member Briggs for his additional context.
Sure. So outlines here, it says in the spring of 2024, Hanover Research partnered with PGCPS Strategic Planning and Resource Management Office to conduct a small staff focus group related to teachers to learn specific actions required to strengthen staff engagement, retention, and productivity with PGCPS. There were some key findings coming from that process, and there were recommendations that came out of that as well. She went on to say that with the funding, we could expand this data collection to gather information from more of the hard to fill positions, such as bus drivers and more teachers, in an effort to employ more research-based strategies to retain employees in the hard to fill positions, and also support the climate and culture and challenges faced with some of the work locations in order to build a more positive climate and culture that leads to employees being brand ambassadors to recruit others to join.
Thank you so much, Chief Howell. Vice Chair Briggs, did you still want to add anything?
Thanks so much, Chair Goins McCants. No, nothing to add, just that I spoke with Dr. Baldwin about this, and so I think that everything is I think we're on the same page about a lot of these things.
Thank you so much. Seeing no other hands, we'll move on to the second amendment for Office of Human Resources, revamping the onboarding process.
Yep, so for that one, again, submitted by Board Member Briggs for $50,000, and her response is as follows. Currently, Human Resources conducts a 2-hour new employee orientation for all new hires. However, research has demonstrated that a comprehensive onboarding program significantly boosts employee retention. In an era where retention is a key focus of recruitment strategies, revamping this process could have a positive impact on both recruitment and retention efforts. Human Resources plans to extend the 2-hour new employee orientation into a full-day session at one of the HR building locations. Additionally, the funds will be allocated to cover materials and supplies necessary for a comprehensive day of onboarding.
Thank you so much, Chief Howell. Board members, do we have any questions on this amendment? Seeing none, that concludes our Human Resources amendment. So we will move on to operations. The first operations amendment is our economic feasibility study.
Thank you, Board Member Goins McCants. So this amendment was submitted by Board Chair Brandon Jackson, focused on the initiative to reinvest in PGCPS, and it has the support of the school administration. Prompted by House Bill 376 and Superintendent House's directive to maximize investment into our facilities, PGCPS is in the beginning stages of developing a cost avoidance and consolidation program. Through the continued modernization of our facilities, this effort will position PGCPS to be the educational system and workplace of choice. The program consists of two equally important pillars. One, consolidation of the administrative staff. The intention is to consolidate approximately from 18 facilities into 7, saving operating dollars through greater efficiencies. We're currently spending approximately $7 million a year in operating dollars on these administrative facilities. In addition, this effort addresses a $300 million deferred maintenance risk. Second, more school reinvestment. With the expected savings, PGCPS will be positioned to invest in major repairs annually to more broadly and quickly improve the condition of our schools. With the reinvestment program, PGCPS will consolidate more buildings, save more money, and savings will accelerate cycle 2 in the educational facilities master plan. Some example reinvestments in schools include HVAC improvements, air quality improvements, window replacements, infrastructure improvements, and roof repairs. As stated, our current administrative functions are in 18 buildings totaling approximately 664,000 square feet, and nearly all are in poor condition, inefficient, and nearing or at the end of their useful life. Through systematic engagement with school district staff in every division, a modern program of requirement for all administration staff revealed they could be housed in approximately 303,000 square feet using modern workplace standards and an efficiently designed building. This consolidation of administrative functions into about half the space could be done without requiring additional funding above the current budget allocation used to operate our current facilities. In addition to being cost neutral or a cost savings, this consolidation of administrative buildings would provide staff and community improved transportation access to the PGCPS administration headquarters, improve departmental collaboration and efficiency because they would be in a centralized location instead of spread out across the district, promote a quality and safe work environment that enhances staff recruitment and retention, support the Board of Education approved climate change action plan through a smaller, more energy efficient administrative building footprint, improve code compliance and ADA accessibility to our administrative offices, and finally, promote equity by providing a consistent administration environment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman. Board members, do we have any questions on this amendment? Seeing none, we will move on to the second operations amendment, renaming of schools.
Thank you so much, Board Member Goins McCants. This amendment was submitted by Board Chair Brandon Jackson also, focused on the renaming of schools currently named after enslavers or slave owners. Approximately 22 schools were identified that would be impacted by this amendment. From an operations perspective, there are costs associated with rebranding each facility to include items like school signage, electronic signs, gym floors, auxiliary gym floors in our high schools only, gym scoreboards, gym bleachers, turf field logos at our high schools only, stadium scoreboard rebranding at our high schools only, and cafeteria rebranding. The total cost of rebranding the items that were just listed at the 22 identified facilities is approximately $10.125 million. In addition to these costs, athletic uniforms would also need to be updated at an estimated cost of approximately $95,000 per high school. It was also noted that there would need to be a more specific analysis with the budget office to determine additional unexpected costs school by school. So, just as a final note, certainly we understand the tenor under which this was submitted. Chief Howell has provided an overview of the concerns we have around the budget and the implications that this amendment would have. And so that would be the one concern for consideration is just how would we absorb the cost of approximately 10.2 million plus whatever we would find after we did a specific analysis.
I just had one additional question with this one. Was the reason why the timeline for these suspended, it was just solely because of the budget deficit that we're facing?
When you say suspended, I want to make sure I understand that part of the question.
So the link, and if that is not the way we should read that, that's also helpful. The link that says like, please see the full response has is a link to a memo with each school and like how much things cost and then also like what cycle. Were those cycles suspended because of our budget deficit or?
Oh, no, thank you so much for that clarification. So those cycles are the identified cycle in our educational facilities master plan. We have cycle 1 schools, cycle 2 schools, cycle 3 schools, and beyond. And so the lower the cycle number, the more dire the situation is that we need to address that school as a priority for reinvestment using our capital dollars.
That is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman. Board members, are there any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for giving us insight into those amendments, and we'll move on to school support and leadership, where there's only one amendment, library services expansion.
Hi, I'm here. I can speak to that. It was sent to Dr. Davis. I think it was board member Moss who wanted at one of his schools to have a library media specialist move from 0.5 to a 1.0. As a district, all elementary schools have 0.5. We would not, as a district, add any more. If we add, we have to add to all, not just one. There was a time in our school district where library media specialists were provided to schools on a 1.0. We got in a budget deficit that was cut down to 0.5. Right now, we have vacancies and have had vacancies in library media specialist role. So we definitely wouldn't be in a posture. It would cost us about 8 million to add that to every single school. But schools have the flexibility, although that position is locked from my office, actually. Schools have the ability to add with their own SBB dollars to that fund if they choose.
Thank you so much, Chief White. And for clarity, SBB is school-based budget.
I apologize. Yes, it is.
Thank you so much for that. Vice Chair Briggs?
No, I know that Dr. White meant to say student-based budget. So I was like, I think she just said yes, right? SBB is student-based budget, not school-based, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was our only one. Oh, Board Vice Chair Brown.
Yes, real quick, for as far as the media is concerned, uh, I think we could possibly get parent volunteer to assist in that. Is that something that they could help with? I mean, it's a volunteer basis. Is that something that the schools do to assist in the media? Like, how does that work? Because I know we have volunteers where my kids go to high school. So I kind of wanted to get some more information on that because I'm sure that will help with the cost as well.
Sure, I believe we have an administrative procedure on volunteers. Schools can definitely recruit. Know that if we have volunteers, they must go through our process of fingerprinting, background check, all of those things that we ask of individuals who are around our students. But a school, if they have volunteers that come in and they've gone through all of those procedures and are following the administrative procedure, can definitely use them as they see fit. Oftentimes, a school could use a volunteer to check out materials. I mean, it's many different ways that they can use volunteers in their schools.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. White, for filling in and explaining that the implications of that amendment to us. We will move on now to the Office of Integrity and Compliance with removal of OIC from the budget.
Yes, I can speak to that amendment that was submitted by Board Member Boozer Struthers. So as I stated earlier in the presentation, the Office of Integrity and Compliance budget for 2026 already has a revenue assumption in there that it would be funded by the county. In addition, there is also a proposed legislation out there that the budget would move over to the county. in the event that that legislation doesn't go through, we would still be requesting for this county mandate to be funded by the county. I do want to clarify that in current legislation, it says that the budget shall be included in PGCPS. So we don't have the ability to cut it because that is what's in the law, which is why instead we're asking for the function to be fully funded by the county. So we're hopeful that either the county will fund it or the legislation that's currently floating through the General Assembly to move the budget altogether over to the county will result in the impact of this coming out of the school system's budget. But right now, as it stands, the proposed budget and the requested budget that will be transmitted has no bottom line impact for this function in our budget because we have the cost, but we also have a contribution coming from the county to cover it.
Thank you so much, Chief Howell. Board members, do we have any additional questions on that amendment? Seeing none. Thank you so much. We will move to our final amendment of the evening. This one is for all divisions, a reduction of travel / central office discretionary funds.
Yep, thank you. I can respond to that one. So this is sort of a combined amendment. It was two separate amendments, one submitted by Board Member Moss and Board Member Walker, both really around looking at discretionary spend. One specifically was targeting travel. The other was more broad, like, hey, can we consider reducing discretionary spend across the board by 10%? So as I stated in the presentation earlier, since we've been, produced the budget book in December, we have been continuing with our budget formulation process in order to close the budget gap and to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible with our dollars. And so we have been going back line by line, looking at our discretionary spend across all divisions and determining where there's an opportunity to cut a little bit further to help achieve the savings that we need. It's really targeted and strategic in terms of where those reductions are coming from. So not necessarily a 10% reduction across the board, because what may be important as essential travel in one area may not be as much so in a different area. So it's really looking for when there's opportunities based off of the planned budget and looking at historical spend, reevaluating the priorities of work that is planned for, then maybe we should reconsider. That's really where those reductions are coming from relating to discretionary. Travel is certainly still on the table as a travel and specifically, but looking at discretionary across the board is going to continue to be our focus as we go throughout this reconciliation process. And so we will continue to certainly look at that as an opportunity to be considered to help towards cost savings. But I do, and I think I mentioned this in another conversation as well, when you look at our travel budget across the district, it does reside within central offices, but the largest portion of our travel is actually in the schools' budgets. They have the ability to develop their budgets how they see fit. So when it comes to their student-based budgeting dollars or SBB dollars, they can purchase positions and they can build out their discretionary budgets. And so a portion of that right now has been earmarked for travel. We are actually coming up to the school budgeting process. And so that will change as they begin to build out their budgets for 2026. But we don't mandate and say that they can't have travel for their teachers or educators in their buildings. And so we leave it up to them to determine what makes the most sense for their schools.
Thank you so much, Chief Howell. Board members, do we have any additional questions on this amendment? Seeing none, thank you so much, Chief Howell and the rest of our executive team for this overview and all of your help and support in going through these amendments and helping us as board members understand the impact. The chair informs the public that the amendments will be presented to the board tomorrow, February 20th, 2025, at the final budget work session. Should you wish to speak on the budget, you can sign up by scanning the QR code and have it to display or the website displayed on the screen. Do we have those to? Perfect. So if you wish to speak on the budget, you can sign up by scanning this QR code or visiting the website displayed on the screen. That opportunity will be available until, I believe, when public comment begins, which is 5 p.m. tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes, it ends, we close it at the start of the meeting, which is 5 p.m.
Thank you so much. The chair informs the public that the next virtual operations, budget, and fiscal affairs committee meeting will be on March 19th, 2025. Please continue to check the Prince George's County Board of Education website for meeting information and updates. Thank you all for the great discussions and attending. To our viewers, thank you for watching. There being no further business, the time is now 7:29, and the February 19, 2025 Operations, Budget, and Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting is adjourned.